big file of stuff on Kennedy. And about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, they were purging their files. They sent all my stuff back. I'd forgotten about it. It was just that I just sort of spaced it out. Well, then Judy Collins had a big hit, Both Sides Now, and Joni Mitchell wrote it. So when she was on tour and I was going with her, we went to Joni Mitchell's house, and I saw she had a tree house. I said, "You guys got to go up there." And so I made this neat picture of the two of them. That's Judy was going out with Steve Stills at the time. That's him composing yet another great song on Judy's piano. All right, we're moving right along. Woodstock had to go because Crosby, Stills, and Nash were there. Some of my close friends at the concert. Janis, of all the rock and roll people I ever photographed, she's the one that thrills me the most. She had a presence, and her live performances were remarkable. I really miss her. That's sort of like her transcending in a way after the fact. And there they are, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. My favorite, still some of my favorite music. These guys were great. Good snap of Johnny Winter. Eric Clapton, the king of guitar. I'm living in New York. I learned meditation. I stopped doing everything. I wanted to meditate at the lotus feet of my guru in India. On my way to India, I stopped off to see my sister in London, and I never got any further east. I started working for a film company, shot Charlotte Rampling in her movie. I met a lot of artists, David Hockney drying his hair. And John Lennon again. I was walking through Hyde Park, and there was a big crowd. I wondered what was happening. I ran to the front of what was happening, and there's John. I photographed him many times, but this is the one picture because it looks like the working man's hero that I always thought he was. Okay, I'm in a bus from downtown London to my house in Islington, and I saw this. It was on a bus. It was a Bracelli's alphabet from the 16th century, and it was like these cherubs dancing their way through the alphabet. And I said, could people do that? And as luck would have it, my studio was right there from the Covent Garden Dance Center. So I showed the thing to the dancers that I knew, and I said, "You want to try this?" And they said, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." And so a couple of days later, and a couple of shoots later, we had this whole alphabet. It turns out it's the only freestanding typeface, or the first of them. You see them a lot now, but that was the first one. We shot it with a big camera, and I just wanted to show you the quality of the stuff, immense size. I thought it was going to be a coffee table book and rewriting the whole history of photography, but because of the pubes and the penises, I couldn't get it published. Now it's not that racy, but back in 1975 it was. That's Lady Julia Hodgkin, Howard Hodgkin's wife. Not a good portrait. And I was a sheep herder in Wales. I said I wasn't shooting pictures for magazines. I was like, sort of dropped out for a while. I was a carpenter for a while and a sheep herder. And that's one of my favorite sheep, and walking away. But I was still shooting, but mostly art stuff. And while I was in England, Playboy ran a test that I'd done a couple of years before that took them a couple of years for it to go through the mill, but I had a gumball machine in my studio, and one of the Playboy editors came through and said, "Let's use that in the cover." So we put the bunny logo, pearls still peeling out. And another caveat, the best-selling issue of Playboy in the history of Playboy. Some XX million copies went out that month. I don't know why. I don't know if it's my picture. Pam Rawlings, the model, pretty cute, but, you know, the biggest selling Playboy ever. You can look it up. It's true. I don't know what about it, but it could be because her nipples were showing in it. I don't know. Left New York, left Britain, left New York, and moved to Alabama because New York had tripled in price. I didn't have any money. I had a pair of jeans, a camera, and that's it. So I moved to Alabama, which is warmer and slower, and started a bar and kept going with my pictures. I did an essay called US 11. I walked up and drove and walked along this ancient highway that goes from Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans all the way to Canada, but right before the interstates, before 95 and all that stuff, there was this US 11, and I'm sort of prouder of this than almost anything I've done. Pretty good essay. Bring your camera. Photographer's paradise. It's falling apart, but there it is. And at the end of it is utopia. If you wanted to know what utopia looked like, there it is. I don't know whether there's a keg party going inside there, but that's utopia, in case you wanted to know. That's the beach down in Alabama. Has a beach on the Gulf. It looked like, I don't know, it's just a snapshot, but there's something about it that looks like Adam and Eve. I mean, some, you know, the beginning of time. I don't know. It's just an innocent picture. Another essay I did. This one, I went across the country back and forth, looking at all the things that said Elvis or pictures of Elvis. If it said Elvis, I shot it. If it was a picture of Elvis peeking out from anywhere, I shot it. And it turned out to be a pretty good book. And the day the book came out, I was on Channel 4 in New York talking about my book. And they said, we interrupt this program to go to Japan, where then President Bush, Poppy Bush, had just vomited all over the president of Japan. And so the week after that, it was Desert Storm, so this book didn't sell so much. Every failed author has an excuse. That's mine. I went down to Mexico, photographed Uxmal and those places, but I was using infrared black and white film, which gives it this weird-ass color, which I think is pretty neat. And everyone else was photographing sombreros and burros, and I think the walls look pretty good. It looks like abstract expressionists to me, so that's what I photographed. Turned into this nice poster. Ta-da! Here we are. There's 19,756 places to photograph Cape Cod, but there's 23,000 photographers out there doing the same thing. So you have to really work hard to come up with interesting stuff. Well, there they are. And that looks like a Ansel Adams to me. It's really, really sharp and crisp, but I did it with a teeny bitty camera. I was really amazed how that worked out. And there's the whole summer in one picture. Oh. The Cape Cod summer in one picture. With the thing, boop, boop, boop. A lot of people photograph the water as a subject, and I went out into the water and shot back toward the land, and the light is totally different if you're looking the other way. Instead of looking at Portugal, you look back toward Balsam Beach, you get neat, interesting shots. That's pretty recent. A friend of mine called up and said, "You want to go to China?" Yes. And this is Simitai. It's not where everyone else goes. And the parking lot's way down there. And they went up that way. And I went about that far, and I couldn't make it. So I came up this way and was helped up the last, I don't know, a couple of hundred yards by these Mongolian teenagers. And I got to this part of the bridge that nobody else ever goes to. And that's what I want. I don't want a tourist shot. I want something new. You can see it. If this were bigger, you could see it wind all the way through and you get to the end. You see almost all 3,000 miles of it. There's some of our Chinese brothers, the tough Chinese military, Peace Corps, peace. I don't know. Oh, those mean-spirited Chinese kids thinking about where they're going to get their next Coca-Cola and what, I don't know. It seems like the Chinese are really enjoying their newfound wealth. Some of you know the work of Robert Frank, of the people on the trolley in New Orleans, and it's this wonderful photograph, and everywhere I go I try to emulate it looking at buses. That's the closest I've ever come to it. I should have the Robert Frank here picture so you could compare, but yep, stuff. Oops. Can I go back? Yeah. That was the Olympics in Beijing that year. No, there's Shanghai. Not quite the China that we picture when we think about China. It's astonishing what they've done with their... Okay, works in progress. Moving right along. I call this internal combustion. I started it years and years ago when I heard electric cars were coming, and I thought sooner or later they're going to be electric cars, but I really haven't done much about it because the car thing has happened. Hey, but it wouldn't have been a bad essay. The end of gas, the end of... There once was a Chevrolet, no parking anytime, blah, blah, blah. Anyway. Another essay thing is neon ladies. There's another one on this somewhere, but now this is essentially what I've been doing most of my life. I like fashion and landscape, but mostly I'm a portrait guy. And these are two sisters that came to my studio wearing my sweaters. He was in that Harry Belafonte thing that Duke was in. There's our local guy, Chandler Travis, who plays all over the Cape. Neat portrait. Nice lady. Dr. Amos Gordon, this band leader and teacher that I knew in Alabama, I said, you got to come to my studio, and I got to do this picture, and he did just the right thing. What a guy. Mississippi John Hurt. Again, USIA wanted to all their stuff was published in Europe, which is why nobody's seen my stuff here. But Mississippi John was he rekindled the folk world. It's lucky it's in black and white because that wallpaper is baby shit green. You would have terrible, terrible color. There he is again. There was a club in D.C. that every week had different stars, music and comedians, and Woody showed up, and I couldn't decide which one of was the best one, so I just printed them all. I like that. Best way to do it. I guess I'm still with the Peace Corps. Jack Kennedy died, Lyndon Johnson's the president. A lot of the Peace Corps people went over to the White House to work for him. He was pissed off that he didn't have any pictures of him looking any good. So they called me up to get him, and I shoot. He's about this tall, so it's hard to get him to look anything, all the pictures he's looking down. So I was shooting and wasn't getting anywhere. So I said, and told the assistant to stand up in the chair and put your hand up. And Mr. President, please look at Lloyd's hand. And he did, and he got that one shot of him looking up. And they used it, not on the cover of his book, but they used it at the convention in Atlantic City, '64. I wish I could show you the size of that. I didn't make this picture. Someone made it for me. I was on my way there, but I had a car crash. And I was dying to get there because I wanted to scrap the ear from the big portrait and wallpaper my bathroom with it, but I never made it. Oops, wrong way. Oh, you saw that one already. Julie's in there twice. Andy came through Birmingham doing portraits. Then he'd shoot hundreds and hundreds of Polaroids of these uber rich ladies, and then he'd make a big silk screen and go red, yellow, blue, $75,000. And he was doing it, doing like that all that time. He was, no wonder he was happy. Timothy Leary. What's her name?
Lady Bird Johnson.
Lady Bird.
No. She's the editor of Vogue. Diana Vreeland. Good portrait of her. She hated it, but she died, and then the New Yorker ran it full page. I was really proud to have a full page picture in the New Yorker. I really liked that picture. She should have liked it too. Not bad of Ralph Abernathy. What I'm doing nowadays is photographing kids. I love doing it. I'm still a portrait making guy. Here's a friend of mine. And, Pete Seeger at the height of his career, I think it was like in the 60s. He's the guy that kept folk music alive for a while. Now, remember that first picture I took, the kid with the Tom, my brother Tom, he was holding the model Nautilus. He became a terrific model maker. He went to Hollywood. He got a job with Disney, and by the time Disney was making sets and scenes for Euro Disney and Disney World, they called on my brother because he was the expert on anything to do with the Nautilus. And there he is on the deck of the full-size Nautilus in Paris. Wow. Of all the people I know, he lived his dream all the way from a kid with an idea about how much he loved 20,000 Leagues of Sea. Here he is on the deck of the actual machine that he built for Disney. And he's no longer on the planet. He didn't die. He didn't live much longer than that. That was the end of his life. But every time I do this show, I dedicate my remarks to my brother Tom. That's it. Thank you very much for being here, y'all. Okay. Thanks a lot. There's a book here.
Questions?
And I'll be happy to take some questions. She made the cover. And then 50 years later, there we are at the same place that happened from the march, and we met up. And someone took our picture. She became the superstar and the poster child for the march. And when she goes to the mall, the National Park guys want to get their picture taken with her, rather than the other way around. Playboy question?
Well, I was just wondering what it was. I think I saw one there. Was that the only one you had was the cover?
I didn't. I shot some portraits. I shot Shriver, you know, for little inserts, but I never shot. This is sort of sad. Playboy asked me if I wanted to join the staff one time, and I said, "No, I don't think so." Big mistake. You could travel the world and photograph beautiful women everywhere you went, first class. You know, nah. I didn't want to move to Chicago for some reason. I like New York. That was a mistake too, because Chicago's a terrific city. I don't know why I didn't go there. Anyway, no, that's the only picture I did for them. But like I said, you can look it up. They've never sold more covers than that issue.
What's your camera there?
This one, I just got it a week ago. It's a Sony, yeah, what do they call it? RX1.
Yeah.
They made an RX3 from something. I just got this one because it's cheap. It's got a little Zeiss lens on it, makes movies, it fits in your pocket. I could take a picture of you guys like this, click, bang, and you could blow it up, and you could see all your freckles on everybody's face. I mean, it's incredibly sharp. Much sharper than film stuff these days. They're gonna. Yeah.
I got a couple of grandsons that keep talking about wanting to go into photography. How did you get started again? And is that a...
Too late. It's too late for you.
No, my grandson. I want to advise my grandsons here.
You do it by doing it, and you go to museums and read books and picture books and see what, not only what makes good photographs, but what makes good imagery of any kind, like museum, beautiful.
You didn't have to go to school to do this.
They didn't have a school to do it when I started out, except the Missouri School of Journalism had a photography course. Now they teach it in high schools and everywhere.
Yeah.
And every semester, thousands of photographers are coming out in the street.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'd start if I was still going to start today.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd be a drone pilot. Take these pictures incomparable. Yes.
What's your favorite medium? Color, black and white, sepia, what?
There's a guy up here asking the question. Hold on one second.
I assume all of those, or almost all of those, were taken on film, not digital?
The Cape Cod ones are mostly digital. And before that, yeah, all film and all with a Leica. Mostly with a Leica and a Nikon. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, what is your favorite medium? Black and white, color, sepia? Or...
Terrific question. For the longest time, it was black and white because that's what you could do in your darkroom. You can manipulate it yourself. Color printing is pricey and stinky and expensive. But now they got computers, you can do all that stuff in color, like on your computer. It's great fun. That's how the alphabet thing was made. I could never have printed all those without a computer. I couldn't have put all those color pictures on one thing without cutting them out, snipping it, re-photographing it, like foolishness.
Did you ever have a picture of Louis Armstrong?
Oh, what a great question. No, but there's a guy in Cape Cod who jacked somebody. And he sold his collection for $1 million. So he hung out with Louis. No, I didn't see him. Duke, yes. Louis, no. Jack, what's his name? Can't think of it.
Who was your favorite and who was your worst portrait?
What?
No worries.
Who's the most favorite person to photograph?
No, that you found, in your opinion, was the best to work with, and who was the worst to work with? As far as the portrait is concerned.
It's, except for Judy Collins, who we are buddies. We've been together for a long time, buddies and friends. Most of the stuff when I was with Life Magazine, knock, knock, Life Magazine, oh, come in, click, click. I'm not friends with these guys. I'm doing a job. And you sort of get the sort of little rapport so you can work. But after the thing is done, I don't know. I liked working with Barbara Walter. She was a lot of fun. I'm sorry that stuff's not in there. It's in the book, though. Go.
I didn't see a portrait of your wife.
Which one?
Recent. Present.
I've got photographs of all my wives. The nice redhead with the freckles, that was my second wife.
Couple of playboys.
How has digital photography changed the lives of professionals?
Incredible question. It's really changed everything. Well, it's sort of self-evident. You shoot a picture and go like this, oh, it turned out. Once upon a time, it took a week to get the damn film back. By that time, you know, the image, B, film photography and they're not quite the same. There's something different about silver images and digital images, and the way that the digital people have made the camera so sharp that it's almost like not photography anymore. It's like you're there. Silver imagery and the analog imagery had this sort of feeling that's like art, you know, like an etching or something. It's more substantial in a way. But everyone's a photographer now. Hey, that's me! Okay, that's it, guys. Thank you very much for all being here. Enjoyed it a lot.
Hello, I'm Linda Bliss and welcome to the Mashpee Senior Center News. Thank you to all who completed the Barnstable County's Healthy Aging Cape Cod Survey. The survey is closed as of March 1st, and we are pleased that Mashpee residents were among the highest number who completed the survey. Stay tuned. When the report is completed, we'll keep you informed. Do you have questions about senior housing? Do you want to know what's available, what it costs, and how to apply? Carol Mitchell of the Mashpee Housing Authority will be at the Mashpee Senior Center to answer your questions regarding this very important topic on March 4th at 1 p.m. Housing applications will also be available should you like to apply for senior housing. Please RSVP to the Mashpee Senior Center at 508-539-1440 or stop by the front desk to sign up. If you are interested in learning about your roots, Greg McKelvey will get you started with Genealogy 101, Discovering Your Roots. Greg, a volunteer, will help you get started on the journey to discover your family history, including research methods and plotting a family tree. There will be 4 sessions on Thursday mornings at 11 a.m. throughout March. RSVP at the center or call 508-539-1440, extension 3512. Join our new activity coordinator, Julie Silver, for a Getting to Know You breakfast. Julie has lots of fun planned for the event, and a light breakfast will be served. Join her on March 27th at 10 a.m. Please RSVP. The V&A of Cape Cod will present a 3-part series on healthy eating, March 12th, 19th, and 26th at 1 p.m. This series will help you to navigate the complexity of understanding food labels and making healthy food choices. We will discuss portion control and setting sugar and salt limits. Together we will create some healthy breakfasts and find creative ideas for lunch and dinner. Please RSVP to the Mashpee Senior Center. We know a thing or two about retirement here at the Senior Center, so come join us as we celebrate the retirement of Gunner, a Mashpee canine dog. Gunner was a Mashpee second-generation drug-sniffing dog. We will all enjoy cake, except of course Gunner, and hear from his handler, Sergeant John Petrish. Learn things such as what his training entailed, his involvement in several narcotics operations, and what civilian life for him is like. Let's give him a warm send-off as he starts his adventures into retirement. The retirement party will be held Tuesday, March 19th at 10 a.m. And of course, please RSVP if you would like to attend. Look for the Buried in Treasures workshop starting in mid-March and will continue for 16 weeks. The Buried in Treasures workshop is based on the book Buried in Treasures, Help for Compulsive Acquiring, Saving, and Hoarding. During this 16-week action-oriented self-help support group, you will receive support and get help to develop strategies to declutter the home and work on ways to change problematic acquiring and discarding behavior. You must pre-register for the course by calling Erica Woods at 508-375-6620. There is no fee for this program, and each person will receive a book at no charge. Crafts with Karen will feature lap blankets on Thursday, March 14th at 2 p.m. and finger looping on the 28th. There is a small fee to cover supplies, which will be provided. Make a beautiful infinity scarf or soft baby blanket. This month, the book club meets on Friday, March 15th at 2 p.m. We will be covering The Reckoning by John Grisham. No reservations needed, just stop by. Monday morning movie musings will meet Mondays, March 11th and 25th. We will be discussing documentaries and how they differ from mainstream movies. We will discuss Walt, the man behind the myth, on the 11th, and The Cove on the 25th. Please watch these movies ahead of time and stop by to discuss. Drop-ins are welcomed. The Mashpee Senior Center is a site for the AARP Tax Aid Income Tax Preparation Program. The Tax Aid program has begun at the Mashpee Senior Center and will continue through Monday, April 15th, 2019. Appointments will be available on Mondays between 9:15 and 2, and on Fridays between 9:15 and 2. Call the Senior Center at 508-539-1440 to schedule your appointment. You will be given an appointment time. No special requests for a particular tax preparer will be taken. After making your appointment, please stop by the Senior Center to pick up the income tax questionnaire. Please fill out the questionnaire and bring it to your appointment. It is very important that you pick up and complete the questionnaire. To learn more about what's required for an appointment, contact the Senior Center. And that is all we have for this edition of the Mashpee Senior Center News. I'm Linda Bliss. See you next time.
Hi, my name is Tara Carline, Special Police Officer and Victim Advocate for Mashpee Police Department.
And I'm Lauren Haddad, Outreach Coordinator for the Mashpee Council on Aging. The Mashpee Community Services Unit, in conjunction with the Mashpee Council on Aging, would like to remind residents of our Reaching Seniors team. As part of our Reaching Seniors team, Tara and I will be visiting various homes in Mashpee.
Our goal is to introduce ourselves and connect with seniors and their care partners who may need support in the community. In our community, we have seniors who may be caregivers of either their spouse, parents, adult children, grandchildren, or may have just suffered a recent loss. We also work with seniors who have cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers. These are just some examples of how seniors may benefit from a visit by the Reaching Seniors team.
Our Reaching Seniors team helps us achieve the Mashpee Police Department's and the Council on Aging's goal of being accessible and visible to the community. Through the Reaching Seniors team, we are able to provide support to our senior residents and their caregivers out in the community. For any questions or further information, please feel free to reach out to either Tara or myself by calling either the Mashpee Police Department or the Mashpee Senior Center.
We look forward to meeting with you.
So we have the 4th annual Chili Fest that benefits both the Boys and Girls Club of Cape Cod and the Falmouth Service Center. We have 400 people here today, and we have over 25 entrants that are both professional, a lot of restaurants from around the Cape that have chipped in, and some really great amateurs who are here today too.
So the Falmouth Service Center is the Upper Cape Regional Food Pantry. We serve Falmouth, Mashpee, Joint Base Cape Cod, and anybody who works in Falmouth but can't get to their pantry in their hometown. We also serve any military or veteran, despite where they live. And we're currently serving anybody who had been affected by the federal furlough, and that includes all of the Coast Guard.
As being, an alum of the Boys and Girls Club myself, I know how much it has to offer. Can you tell everybody what the Boys and Girls Club does for this community?
It helps young people like you turn into amazing adults who have great jobs and have skills that people wouldn't have if they didn't go to the Boys and Girls Club. One of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that we help young people stay on the right track in life. We help them with education. We do homework, tutoring, health and fitness programs, science programs, nurturing programs. We do mentoring. We do arts programs. We do sports programs. So you name it, we do it. Anything a young kid might want to do, they can do at the Boys and Girls Club. Any Cape Cod child, age 6 to 18, is welcome at the Boys and Girls Club when we're open for their age group.
I first took my boys on the water when they could walk. My oldest, he works really hard with me, and I'm really proud of him.
That would be one of the best things in the world for me, to have my daughter take over my business. It'd be a dream come true.
William seems to really enjoy coming out on the boat and checking things out, and I'd like to take him any chance I get.
Families have been fishing together on Cape Cod for centuries, and the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance is working to build a fishing future for generations to come.
Without the Fishermen's Alliance, we wouldn't be able to find the markets that we need to expose Americans to the healthy, delicious fish that our port's now landing.
When you're doing a small boat fishery, it's a father-son thing, or it's a family thing, it's a community thing.
When you donate to the Fishermen's Alliance, you help ensure sustainable fishing for years to come, for their sons and their daughters and all the fishing families of Cape Cod.
Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The terror attack in Christchurch on Friday was the worst act of terrorism on our shores. It was, in fact, one of the worst globally in recent times. It has exposed a range of weaknesses in New Zealand's gun laws. The clear lesson from history around the world is that to make our communities safer, the time to act is now.
New Zealand's racing to enact new gun reform measures 3 days after a white supremacist gunman shot dead 50 Muslim worshippers at 2 mosques in the city of Christchurch. We'll speak with the Australian activist who led a campaign to overhaul Australia's gun laws 2 decades ago after a massacre that killed 35 people. Plus, we'll speak to a leading scholar on Islamophobia and a former white supremacist who now campaigns against radicalization. Then to the global strike for climate change inspired by 16-year-old Swedish high schooler Greta Thunberg.
The last time I checked, there were over 123 countries where there were going to be strikes today, and 2,052 places, cities.
An estimated 1.4 million children across 125 countries took part in a global climate strike Friday to demand world leaders do more to address climate change. We'll speak to 2 strike leaders. In Minneapolis, 10th grader Isra Hersey, the daughter of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and Alyssa Chen, a senior at the Bronx High School of Science. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Mourners gathered over the weekend in New Zealand and around the world to pay tribute to the victims of Friday's deadly terrorist massacre at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. The death toll has reached 50, with at least 50 people injured. Police have arrested and charged 28-year-old Australian Brenton Tarrant, who they say acted as a lone gunman and is described as a right-wing anti-immigrant white supremacist. Tarrant live-streamed the attack and published a manifesto in which he praised President Donald Trump as a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose. In the wake of the horrific attack, the deadliest shooting in New Zealand's history, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern vowed to reform the country's gun laws.
We cannot be deterred from the work that we need to do on our gun laws in New Zealand. They need to change, regardless of what activity may or may not have happened with gun retailers. They will change.
Meanwhile, President Trump came under fire for refusing to acknowledge the global rise of white nationalism in the wake of the attack.
We see today white nationalism as a rising threat around the world. I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet. They're just learning about the person and the people involved. But it's certainly a terrible thing.
Trump tweeted more over the weekend about the late Senator John McCain and advocating for Fox News to bring back host Jeanine Pirro, who appeared to be suspended after attacking Congressmember Ilhan Omar on air for wearing a hijab last week, than he did about the New Zealand massacre. He did not tweet once in more than 20 tweets about the massacre. Security experts and government agencies have warned that white nationalist attacks are on the rise and pose a major domestic threat. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security said in 2017 white supremacist groups carried out more attacks in the U.S. than any other domestic extremist group since 2001. On Sunday, White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney was asked on Fox News if Trump would deliver a speech condemning white supremacy and Islamophobia, to which he responded, "The president is not a white supremacist. I'm not sure how many times we have to say that." President Trump signed his first presidential veto Friday after lawmakers in both houses of Congress voted in favor of a resolution reversing Trump's declaration of a national emergency on the U.S.-Mexico border. He once again attacked immigrants as he signed the veto.
It is a tremendous national emergency. It is a tremendous crisis. Last month, more than 76,000 illegal migrants arrived at our border. We're on track for 1 million illegal aliens to rush our borders. People hate the word invasion, but that's what it is. It's an invasion of drugs and criminals and people. We have no idea who they are.
Trump's statement came just after the manifesto of the New Zealand attacker was released, in which he echoed that term invasion. The veto sends the measure back to lawmakers, but they're not expected to garner the two-thirds majority required to overturn it. California and other states filed a lawsuit last month challenging Trump's national emergency. The Ethiopian transport minister said early investigations have revealed clear similarities between the crashes of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 and October's Lion Air Flight 610 in Indonesia. While detailed information is yet to be released, flight tracking data shows both flights on the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft seemed to go through unpredictable climbs and then a nosedive after they took off. Both flights killed all crew and passengers on board after the planes crashed minutes after takeoff. The Wall Street Journal reported Sunday the Transportation Department is launching investigations into regulators' approvals of the Boeing 737 MAX 8, as well as into the development of the aircraft. Faulty flight control software has been cited as a possible culprit in the two fatal crashes. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced Friday the U.S. will start denying visas to members of the International Criminal Court who may be investigating alleged war crimes by the U.S. military in Afghanistan.
In November of 2017, the ICC prosecutor requested approval to initiate an investigation into, quote, the situation in Afghanistan, end of quote, that could illegitimately target American personnel for prosecutions and sentencing. I'm announcing a policy of U.S. visa restrictions on those individuals directly responsible for any ICC investigation of U.S. personnel.
In response to the news, the ACLU said, quote, this is an unprecedented attempt to skirt international accountability for well-documented war crimes that haunt our clients to this day, unquote. In more news about the ICC, the Philippines officially withdrew from the court Sunday. The International Criminal Court is investigating whether the thousands of murders committed as part of President Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs amounts to crimes against humanity. At least 5,000 people have been killed by the police since 2016, with many more killed in extrajudicial raids and attacks. Students around the world left the classroom and took to the streets Friday for the Youth Climate Strike, calling for decisive action on climate change. The International Day of Action was inspired by 16-year-old Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, who started a weekly Friday strike outside the Swedish Parliament building last year. This is Thunberg speaking at the Stockholm demonstration.
And we, the young people, have not contributed to this crisis. We are not going to accept it. We are not going to let it happen, and that is why we are striking. We strike because we want a future, and we will continue.
Greta Thunberg has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Here in New York City, Democracy Now! Spoke to students rallying outside City Hall Friday.
My name is Tasnim Imu, and I'm from Urban Assembly Institute of Math and Science for Young Women. They say that education isn't worth sacrificing to make a political point, but I think they're wrong, because we're all here going to school and we think that we have this big future for us, but our education will be ignored if we're too busy trying to survive instead of living.
Later in the broadcast, we'll speak with the high school students from the Bronx High School of Science, as well as Ilhan Omar, Congressmember Ilhan Omar's daughter in Minneapolis. At least 2 people have died, with thousands more displaced as historic levels of flooding in the upper Midwest due to heavy rains and melting snow from last week's bomb cyclone led to states of emergency in the region. Nebraska saw its worst flooding in half a century, prompting concerns about a nuclear power plant located along the Missouri River, although authorities say the plant continued to operate as usual through the weekend. In Zimbabwe and Mozambique, at least 120 people are believed to be dead, with many more missing after tropical cyclone Idai battered the southern African nations from Thursday to Saturday. The death toll is expected to mount in what Mozambique's environment minister called the biggest natural disaster the country has ever faced. In Indonesia, major flooding and landslides in the eastern Papua region killed at least 77 people over the weekend, according to officials. Thousands were forced to evacuate their homes. Also in Indonesia, a landslide triggered by a 5.5 magnitude earthquake on Lombok Island killed at least 2 people Sunday. In Israel, the Supreme Court banned the far-right leader of the Otzma Yehudit, or Jewish Power Party, from running in the upcoming elections, citing racist anti-Arab comments by Michael Ben-Ari. Last month, embattled Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu formed an alliance with the party despite it being compared to the KKK for its racist and homophobic beliefs. Meanwhile, the court ruled candidates from the Balad United Arab List, an alliance of Israeli Arab parties, can run, overturning a ban by Israel's election committee earlier this month. In Denver, Colorado, noted immigrant rights activist Jeanette Vizguera once again took sanctuary at the Unitarian Church after her stay of deportation expired Friday. She spent 86 days in sanctuary at the church in 2017 before receiving her stay of deportation. Vizguera also announced she is suing Immigration and Customs Enforcement for denying her right to due process in her immigration battle. Jeanette Vizguera spoke to supporters at the Denver church Friday.
It's ridiculous to call it a national emergency. They want to put up a wall when there are national emergencies inside the country like public health, the environment, housing. We have lots of youth who, when they come on hard times, must sleep on the streets. They are American citizens and they are not extending a helping hand to them.
In Kentucky, a federal judge blocked the new highly restrictive so-called fetal heartbeat law hours after Republican Governor Matt Bevin signed the legislation Friday. The law would have banned abortions once a fetal heartbeat can be detected, something that typically happens just 6 weeks into a pregnancy and before many women even realize they're pregnant. The measure is now on hold for 2 weeks pending further hearings. Staffers on the Bernie Sanders 2020 presidential campaign announced Friday they're unionizing in what's believed to be a first for any major presidential campaign. The president of United Food and Commercial Workers Local 400, which will represent the Sanders campaign staffers, said, quote, "We expect unionizing will mean pay parity and transparency on the campaign with no gender bias or harassment and equal treatment for every worker, whether they're in Washington, D.C., Iowa, New Hampshire, or anywhere else," unquote. Several women staffers accused Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign of not properly handling sexual harassment and unequal pay complaints. And New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand officially launched her 2020 presidential bid Sunday. In her campaign video entitled Brave Wins, Gillibrand pledged support for paid family leave, universal health care, a Green New Deal, gun control, and taking money out of politics. She was also an outspoken early supporter of the Me Too movement, but reports emerged earlier this month that her office mishandled a sexual harassment complaint from a former staffer. Senator Gillibrand is inviting supporters to meet her for a rally on March 24th in front of the Trump International Hotel in New York. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. 50 people are dead, and millions around the globe are mourning following the massacre at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, Friday. The terrorist attack unfolded during Friday prayer when a lone gunman and avid white supremacist opened fire on worshippers while live streaming the attack on Facebook. It was the deadliest shooting in the country's modern history. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern described Friday as one of New Zealand's darkest days and vowed to change the country's gun laws.
The terror attack in Christchurch on Friday was the worst act of terrorism on our shores. It was, in fact, one of the worst globally in recent times. It has exposed a range of weaknesses in New Zealand's gun laws. The clear lesson from history around the world is that to make our communities safer, the time to act is now.
Police have arrested and charged a 28-year-old Australian man named Brenton Tarrant, an anti-immigrant white supremacist who published a manifesto in which he praised President Donald Trump as a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose, unquote. But Trump has refused to acknowledge the global rise of white nationalism in the wake of the attack, saying, "I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems, I guess," he said. In New Zealand, the Muslim community is mourning the dead, the youngest among them 3 years old. Muqad Ibrahim was murdered after being separated from his brother and father in the chaos at the Al-Nur Mosque. The terror began in the early afternoon Friday in central Christchurch when the gunman entered the Al Nur Mosque and opened fire on worshippers gathered for Friday prayer. The shooter live-streamed the massacre, shooting dead one man who attempted to tackle him and killing 41 more in a 6-minute rampage. At one point, the gunman went to his car to get another weapon and returned to the mosque to kill more people. A paramedic said, quote, there was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. The shooter drove away before police arrived on the scene and headed 4 miles east to a second mosque, the Linwood Mosque, where he once again opened fire on worshippers, this time through a window. That's when Abdulaziz, who was praying at the Linwood Mosque with his sons, ran towards the attacker, flinging a credit card machine at him and causing him to drop his shotgun. The gunman then ran to his car, and Aziz threw the shotgun, shattering the car window. The shooter drove away, leaving 7 dead at the Linwood Mosque. This is Abdulaziz describing his encounter with the attacker.
He dropped his gun and ran, and I chased him. He sat on his car, and what I did, I had that shotgun in my hand, and I threw on him like an arrow. I threw the shotgun, and that shotgun actually smashed his window, and I could see him is frightened. Then he swore at me and he just took off.
Minutes later, New Zealand police apprehended the shooter. The first call to police from Al Nur Mosque came at 1:41 p.m. The gunman was arrested at 2:17 p.m. 49 people were dead. 1 more would later die in the hospital. The shooter reportedly used 5 guns to carry out the attack, including 2 semi-automatic assault weapons. New Zealand's Attorney General David Parker told Radio New Zealand, quote, we need to ban some semi-automatics, perhaps all of them, unquote. Well, for more, we're going to Rebecca Peters in Sydney, Australia, an international arms control advocate, member of the International Network on Small Arms. She led the campaign to reform Australia's gun laws after the 1996 Port Arthur massacre, when a gunman shot dead 35 people. After the attack, Australia cracked down on gun violence, outlawing automatic and semi-automatic rifles. More than 640,000 weapons were turned into authorities in a nationwide buyback. Rebecca Peters, welcome back to Democracy Now! First, your response to what happened in neighboring New Zealand. You're in Australia now, where the gunman is from. And then talk about the immediate call of the New Zealand Prime Minister to deal with gun control immediately, even faster than you did after the Tasmanian massacre.
Well, Amy, of course, it was just so devastating and heartbreaking to hear that yet another atrocity of this sort had taken place. We're accustomed to hearing about these things happening in the United States, but we've got out of the habit in Australia since we don't have them anymore. And it was just shocking to realize that it had occurred in New Zealand and that it was an Australian who had carried out this horrific attack. And I suppose for those of us who have worked on the issue of trying to prevent gun violence, in addition to being heartbreaking, it was heart-sinking because there'd been plenty of warnings and of advice over the years that New Zealand should strengthen its gun laws, but those warnings and advice had never been heeded.
Let's go back to New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
I want to also acknowledge, when Australia found itself tragically in a similar position to what we find ourselves now, they took 12 days to make their decision. We have taken 72 hours. There is, though, still some detail that needs to be worked through. I want to do that, but still move as quickly as we can.
So that's the New Zealand Prime Minister. Rebecca Peters, explain what happened in Australia. I mean, a country, it's believed, of crocodile Dundees or gun lovers. How quickly this turned and what you're seeing is being demanded right now in New Zealand.
Well, in Australia, you're right. We are an outdoor country. We're a frontier country. We have a lot of people who like to use guns. And in that sense, we're similar to New Zealand. We're culturally very similar as well. But the laws had been there was a patchwork of laws across the country. Each state had different laws, and many of them were not very strong. So, for example, semi-automatic weapons were available in some states, but banned in other states. Some states had registration of all guns and some did not. And what that meant was that it was possible to take advantage of the loopholes provided by the weaker law states to commit gun violence. And in 1996, we had a mass shooting at Port Arthur in Tasmania. 35 people were killed, and at the time it was the largest tragedy of that type ever in the world. Unfortunately, it's been surpassed since then. And although there had been many attempts to reform the laws, the politicians had always been intimidated by the gun lobby and had been reluctant to do anything. But in 96, we had a brand new prime minister, and he said, I'm going to fix this. And so he called all the states together and said, we're going to once and for all fix this problem. And they came up with a scheme of a list of points that all the states agreed to put into their laws as a minimum standard. And that included a ban on semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, a buyback, as you mentioned, to get rid of them, registration of all guns in every state, much higher standard of licensing, including the need to prove that you have a legitimate reason, and a lot of other, a 28-day waiting period, and various other measures which basically close the loopholes and raise the standard and we've been much safer ever since. The first thing that obviously comes to mind when an atrocity like this happens is the question of semi-automatic weapons. And the Prime Minister of New Zealand correctly mentioned that as a priority. And in Australia, as Jacinda Ardern mentioned, it took 12 days for this agreement to be nutted out. It had to be negotiated between eight states, but that was obviously pretty quick. In New Zealand, she has announced pretty well immediately that they plan to make reforms. My slight concern is that they should take the time to consider not just piecemeal changes, like not just banning military assault weapons, but looking at all the reforms that need to be made, because the New Zealand gun law is full of loopholes. It's basically the same as Australia's worst laws were about 20 years ago. So what kind of gun lobby does New Zealand have? Is it similar to Australia? And why didn't New Zealand pass the same kind of legislation when you did back in back in the time of the Tasmanian massacre? In 1996, yes. It was so originally New Zealand should have joined that scheme because the scheme was developed under the auspices of something called the Australasian Police Ministers' Council. We have a police minister in every state, and New Zealand also has a police minister. And the word Australasian means Australia and New Zealand. And our two countries work together on policing questions a lot, on crime prevention and investigation. And it made sense for New Zealand also to pass the same sort of gun laws that were being passed in Australia. But the gun lobby is very powerful in New Zealand. And basically, and at the time it was the National Party government, which is more susceptible to the gun lobby because it sees its strength as being in the rural areas, and basically the idea of joining the Australian scheme was vetoed by the gun lobby, which was a huge shame because they didn't make the progress that they should have made. New York Times reported Friday New Zealand's almost alone with the United States in not registering 96% of its firearms. And those are its most common firearms, the ones most used in crimes, Rebecca. Yeah. Yeah, and that was the case in at least 3 Australian states 20 years ago. The only firearms that were registered were handguns, and but most guns are not handguns, and so yes, it means that for the vast majority of guns in New Zealand, there's no record of who has them or where they are. There's no ability to know when a person becomes ineligible to have a gun. There's no way of knowing if they have it, and therefore there's no way of taking it away from them. Like in Australia, the most common reason for losing your license is domestic violence. And we have registration of guns. So if a person loses their license, the police also know how many guns they actually have. The other thing about registration, which is just so crucial, is if you have a licensing system, New Zealand does have a licensing system, although it's very easy to get a license. The idea of a licensing system is only a person with a license is allowed to have a gun. But if you don't have a registration system, then there's nothing to keep a licensed gun owner accountable. Like if I have a license and I buy a gun, since there's no registration, I can easily sell it or give it to you, even though you don't have a license, and there's no chance that I'll be caught. And so registration is absolutely crucial to make sure that your licensing system works. And those are the kinds of things that the New Zealand government should look at. Those are the sorts of loopholes they should look at closing, rather than just focusing on banning assault weapons. And they mention assault weapons a lot, and obviously they should be banned. But the tricky thing with semi-automatic rifles is that there are semi-automatic rifles that are not considered to be assault weapons, but that can be modified so that they become assault weapons. And that's why in Australia, all semi-automatic rifles were banned, to avoid the problem of people buying non-assault weapons and modifying them to become assault weapons. So New Zealand should take that same step.
Well, Rebecca Peters, I want to thank you for being with us. International Arms Control Advocate, member of the International Network on Small Arms, led the campaign to reform Australia's gun laws after the Port Arthur massacre. One last question. The laws were changed in 1996 in Australia after 35 people were killed in Tasmania. How many massacres have there been since?
Well, since then, we've never had another one of these public mass shootings of the type that we used to have a lot of. What we have had is a couple of family killings where a father has killed his family while they were asleep, for example. But that's a different type of phenomenon, and it doesn't require a semi-automatic. But when you think about these kinds of events that that the U.S., for example, is so plagued by, and the type of event we had in '96, the one that's just occurred in New Zealand, we've never had another event like that.
Rebecca Peters, thanks so much for being with us. We can't count the number of times in the United States. It has been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in this last 23 years. This is Democracy Now! We'll link to your piece in the Sydney Morning Herald, headlined, "It Didn't Have to Be This Way, How the Gun Lobby Made New Zealand Less Safe." This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we'll look at Islamophobia and white supremacy. Stay with us.
Here's to your garden, here's to your kids. I heard you were in the neighborhood. I've been a long time on a skid. And baby, I'm beside you. You run from the river when it long ran over you. This is for you standing up to a bone-chilling wind. This is for the failures you collected from our sin. And this is for your lonesome tears I never dried. This is for you hanging in the hope that it never died.
Beside You by Tim Finn, Vikrunga, and Dave Dobbin of New Zealand. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We're continuing our coverage of Friday's massacre in New Zealand when a white supremacist gunman shot dead 50 Muslim worshippers at 2 mosques in Christchurch. We turn now to President Trump's response to the attacks. On Friday, he was asked about the increasing threat of white nationalism.
We see today white nationalism as a rising threat around the world. I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet. They're just learning about the person and the people involved. but it's certainly a terrible thing, terrible thing.
On the same day of the massacre in New Zealand, that was Friday, President Trump signed his first presidential veto after lawmakers in both houses of Congress voted in favor of a resolution reversing Trump's declaration of a national emergency on the U.S.-Mexico border. Trump claimed there was an invasion occurring on the southern border.
Congress's vote to deny the crisis on the southern border is a vote against reality. It's against reality. It is a tremendous national emergency. It is a tremendous crisis. Last month, more than 76,000 illegal migrants arrived at our border. We're on track for 1 million illegal aliens to rush our borders. People hate the word invasion, but that's what it is. It's an invasion of drugs and criminals and people. We have no idea who they are. We're bursting at the seams. You can only do so much. And the only option then is to release them. But we can't do that either, because when you release them, they come into our society. And in many cases, they're stone cold criminals. And in many cases, and in some cases, you have killers coming in and murderers coming in, and we're not going to allow that to happen.
President Trump's use of the word invasion came just hours after the New Zealand gunman issued a manifesto where he described immigrants as invaders. In the same manifesto, the gunman praised Trump as a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose. Well, for more, we're going to Khaled Beydoun, law professor at the University of Arkansas, author of American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear. We're also joined by Christian Picciolini, founder of Free Radicals Project, a nonprofit helping people disengage from hate and violent extremism. Picciolini was a leading neo-Nazi skinhead and far-right extremist in the 80s and 90s, now the author of White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement and How I Got Out. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Professor Khaled Beydoun, can you respond to what happened in New Zealand?
Yeah, generally, first it just kind of struck me as an individual, being Muslim American myself, having family members who wear the hijab, having family members who were going to the mosque. The next day, I myself was going to the mosque. So, it struck a real deep personal chord. Fear, obviously, because this kind of thing can happen in the United States, especially with the kind of brazen rhetoric we see from the president. So before I can kind of wrap my head around, the politics of everything, it was a real kind of moment of chilling fear that set in.
Can you talk about why you decided to start a Twitter thread with images of the victims of Friday's massacre, and what happened when you started posting those pictures?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of media the morning of here in the States after the massacre, and I just felt a bit dissatisfied. There was, a fixation on the terrorist, the manifesto of the terrorist, a lot of, centering of him at the expense of not focusing on the victims. And, given my work on Islamophobia, there's a tendency in mainstream media to kind of clump up specifically Muslim victimhood as, faceless, monolithic, dehumanize sort of blocks of people. So I wanted to take that opportunity to really, put a face on who the victims were, tell their stories, draw real human connections that really resonated with people on social media.
And what was the response to what you started posting?
It was, a series of responses. I think that the most sort of striking responses were after the thread had caught some attention and was, generating an audience. I was getting messages from family members of a lot of the victims, friends of the victims, classmates of the victims, telling me more about them, feeding me with more intimate information about who they were. And I tried to compile as much information about these individuals in the rolling thread, again, to humanize these people and show that, the people who were killed, the 50 people, were far more than just statistics. These were individuals who led lives. They were young kids, 3 years old, like you mentioned earlier on with Mukad Ibrahim. They were individuals who were old as 72. Somebody like Saeed Nebi, who was the first identified victim, standing at the door, who welcomed in the terrorist into the mosque. So I tried as much as possible to really put a face on who these people were, illustrating stories, again, that showed that these people were far more than just statistics.
Can you respond to the alleged shooter in his so-called manifesto, more than 80 pages, praising Trump as a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose?
You know, I think that whether it's causation or correlation, this kind of rhetoric that we see from white supremacists at the very top, like President Trump, whether it be words like Islam hates us or using, dog whistles like invasion, this is emboldening, terrorists like the terrorist in New Zealand, Christchurch. We can see the exact same language being used in his manifesto. So, I write in the book, in the American Islamophobia book, that it's important to kind of think about this political rhetoric as far more than just words, but actual dictates that are authorizing individuals on the ground to engage in this vigilante violence and to inflict, extreme, tragedy onto individuals who look like the kind of invaders that Trump is talking about.
Talk more about, well, what's the title of your book, Khalid Beydoun? American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear.
So the book looks to track the history, the genesis, the evolution of Islamophobia as both a popular but also a state-sponsored phenomenon. What's happened in recent years with the rise of Trump is that Islamophobia has become recognized as a form of animus, a form of bigotry. But in the book, I try to show that this form of animus and this form of racism and anti-religious bigotry has deep roots in the United States, both in the legal system, in the media imagination, in the political discourses. There's an underbelly of anti-Muslim animus that facilitates the emergence of the very brazen Islamophobia we see today, weaponized by people like President Trump or by terrorists on the ground in places like New Zealand who commit massacres like we saw on Friday.
I wanted to bring Christian Picciolini into this conversation, founder of Free Radicals Project, the nonprofit that helps people disengage from hate and violent extremism, leading neo-Nazi skinhead and far-right extremist himself in the 80s and 90s. Talk about your response Friday when you heard what happened in New Zealand and heard about the white supremacist, the white nationalist who opened fire, killing 50 Muslim worshippers.
Well, Amy, this tragedy was similar to the hundreds of tragedies that have been happening since the 80s and 90s. This is not an isolated incident. This is not a fringe problem. This is a transnational terrorist alliance. Dating back to the late 80s and early 90s, there have always been connections to overseas white supremacist groups connected to the United States, and this is no different. But this is also another example of how words matter, especially words from a president, because this is now the third or fourth time, just in a matter of months, where violence has occurred or almost occurred because of words that the president said. What's happened now is the internet has created a platform where propaganda and conspiracy theories are being spread to the farthest reaches of the internet, and it's reaching some of our most vulnerable, marginalized, broken individuals who are unstable, but are taking these narratives and it's fulfilling them, it's empowering them to a certain degree. But the end result is always violence, it's always death. And we just saw another example of that in Christchurch, and I suspect it's not going to be the last one we see.
I wanted to go back to what President Trump said on Friday when he was holding his what he called veto ceremony around defying Congress's wishes, Republicans and Democratic senators and Congress members, and saying he's going to appropriate over $8 billion to build a wall on the border. And a reporter shouted out a question to him about the increasing threat of white nationalism.
We see today white nationalism as a rising threat around the world. I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet. They're just learning about the person and the people involved. But it's certainly a terrible thing, terrible thing.
Terrible thing, he says. Christian Picciolini, respond.
Well, I think the president is either uninformed or he's complicit, because this is a problem that has been very visible in our country, for the last 5 or 6 decades. It started with Timothy McVeigh and really with the Oklahoma City bombing, and it really hasn't stopped since then. In the 80s and 90s, the white supremacist movement had a very concerted strategy to mainstream. We recognized back then when I was involved that we were too edgy. Our shaved heads, the tattoos were putting off the average American white racist. So we decided that we needed to look like them, sound like them, and go where they were. So we encouraged people to grow their hair out, to trade their boots in for suits, and to get jobs in law enforcement, and to go to the military and get training, and also to run for office if they had a clean record. And the fruits of that labor are now coming to fruition. But I can tell you that even 30 years ago, I never would have guessed that we'd be in this position today. But I can tell you also 30 years ago, we didn't have a propaganda center and a command post on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Talk about the importance of the internet in all of this, Christian Picciolini. I mean, as we now know, as what happened on Friday, the shooter, as he opened fire, he live streamed this on Facebook. He live streamed this. We haven't shown any of those images. Facebook would soon take that down. Of course, some caught it. Hours after Friday's attack, the president of the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, blamed Trump for the rise of anti-Muslim terror in the U.S. and abroad. This is Nihad Awad.
The terrorist has quoted the most powerful person in the world, President Trump. And I would like to address Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, your words matter. Your policies matter. They impact the lives of innocent people at home and globally. And you should condemn this, not only as a hate crime, but as a white supremacist terrorist attack. And you need to assure all of us, Muslims, blacks, Jews, immigrants, that we are protected and you will not tolerate any physical violence against us because we are immigrants or we are minority. During your presidency and during your election campaign, Islamophobia took a sharp rise, and attacks on innocent Muslims, innocent immigrants, and mosques have skyrocketed. We hold you responsible for this growing anti-Muslim sentiment in the country and in Europe.
So that's Nihad Awad. I'd like you to respond to that, Christian, and also the importance of the internet when it comes to this spread of right-wing white supremacy.
Well, I think a president's words don't just have immediate consequences. They'll have lasting consequences for all the young people who are being born now into this environment of pure extremism. As far as the internet goes, let me paint a picture of who may be on the internet. It's not just our friends and dog pictures, but there are millions of marginalized, alienated, broken young people who are looking for identity, community, and purpose in real life and can't find it there, but they can find it online. And the internet has become flooded since the 2016 election, and even just before that, by propaganda and conspiracy theories coming in from Eastern Europe and from Russia. And it's very difficult to not land on some of this propaganda, but they're also going to some of the most, the places where some of the most vulnerable people are, depression forums, online autism forums. They're talking to our children over headsets when they're playing multi-player gaming, and they're trying to recruit them with these narratives that are mimicking what the president is saying. And because there are so many people online who are not able to potentially establish those relationships in real life, life, they can build whatever identity, community, and purpose they want. And the narratives are being given to them. And this has become the fastest growing underground social movement that I've ever seen in my life.
What do you mean online autism forums?
So discussion forums where people are discussing, living with autism, or even Facebook groups. But it doesn't stop there. They're going to where vulnerable people go to find help, to talk to other people, or even where young people might go where they're looking for that sense of identity, community, and purpose. This is really no different than what I used to do 30 years ago, when I used to look for vulnerable people outside of arcades or outside of punk rock concerts or skate parks. Because the idea is you are banking on the fact that somebody there is going to feel marginalized, is going to have what I call potholes that deviated their path, those things that appear in life like trauma, abuse, poverty, mental illness, that maybe alienate them from the rest of society, and then they promise them paradise.
I wanted to go to the Australian lawmaker who's been publicly shamed for his comments following Friday's massacre, in which he said immigration is to blame for the terrorist attack. Queensland Senator Fraser Anning said the real cause of bloodshed on New Zealand's streets today is the immigration program, which allowed Muslim fanatics to migrate to New Zealand in the first place. On Saturday, while Anning was addressing reporters in Melbourne, Australia, 17-year-old William Connolly stood behind him and cracked a raw egg on the back of his head. The far-right politician immediately swung around and punched the teenager in the face. He then attacked the teenager again before the two were forcibly separated. A group of men then tackled Connolly to the ground and placed him in a chokehold. Connolly was briefly arrested before being released without charge. The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has sided with the teenager, condemning Anning's comments and saying the lawmaker should be charged for assaulting Connolly. Let me ask Khalid Beydoun your response.
Yeah, first the rhetoric of Anning, Senator Anning's, were, pretty much echoing what President Trump has been saying for a long time. One additional point I want to make, besides rhetoric and words from politicians, it's important to also focus on how policies, right? We have a standing Muslim ban in the United States, which has been upheld by the Supreme Court, which echoes what President Trump is saying, but then emboldens what individual, private terrorists like the one in New Zealand go on and do. So there's policy and there's also rhetoric. But I think that we all, sort of champion what Connolly did. I think that he, demonstrated the kind of frustration that individuals had intellectually with the kind of rhetoric politicians are making against immigrants. And I'm happy that the Prime Minister of Australia sided with the kid, condemning that rhetoric, especially after the massacre. For a senator to say that after a massacre is just egregious.
I wanted now to go to Mick Mulvaney. This was truly an astounding moment. The acting chief of staff of President Trump, who was speaking on Fox News. This is the chief of staff of the President of the United States, who found it necessary to say this.
The president is not a white supremacist. I'm not sure how many times we have to say that.
The president is not a white supremacist. I'm not sure how many times we have to say that, he said. Christian Picciolini, you come out of that movement. You were an avowed, proud white supremacist for decades in the 80s and in the 90s. President Trump tweeted this weekend over 20 times. Not once did he mention the massacre. Can you respond to what Mick Mulvaney says? How do you define white supremacy? It is your life. You were a white supremacist for years, and now you fight against it and try to bring people out of this whole movement.
Yeah, I think, just like hatred, white supremacy is born of ignorance. Fear is its father and isolation is its mother. When we don't understand something and we become afraid of it, sometimes that turns into hate. I think a lot of, policies that have come out of this administration have mimicked things that 30 years ago I would have applauded. In fact, white supremacists today are applauding this president's policies and even his words. And in return, on occasion, the president will retweet a conspiracy theory from a white nationalist. This is a problem because, one, we're not calling it out. We obviously have very open wounds in the United States that deal with racism. That's still affecting people. And it's something that we shouldn't really take lightly because now it has turned into direct action against people of color, against Jewish people, against Muslims, and against even the media and politicians. And this is something that words really have consequences. I can tell you, Amy, 30 years ago, I wrote racist music and racist lyrics, and I performed those and sold that music. Well, I never really thought that it had gone anywhere, but 30 years later, that music got into the hands of Dylan Roof, who posted my lyrics on a white supremacist message board just 4 months before walking in to the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. And that is the power, and those are the consequences of our words. And like I said earlier, President Trump's words are going to have lasting implications for our democracy, for our children growing up, and for citizens now who are in fear of their lives because we can't even acknowledge that there's a problem, let alone we're not prepared to address it. In 2007, Darrell Johnson with the Department of Homeland Security called out the fact that white supremacy was on the rise. And that, under President Obama, that was shelved. So this goes back a long period in our history. This certainly isn't just President Trump, but I can tell you that for the first time in modern history, our president's words are actually causing people to murder each other.
And again, the alleged shooter in New Zealand praised Donald Trump, also praised Dylan Roof and talked about what an inspiration he was. And yes, it's very important to talk not only about what happened there, but also to talk about what happened in Pittsburgh with the killing of the Jews, the same language used, the Jewish worshipers there at the Tree of Life Synagogue, talking about invaders and invasion. And that's the same language that President Trump used once again on Friday, hours after the manifesto came out, repeating those words. I want to end by reading a few of the names of the victims of the Friday massacre at the New Zealand mosques. Among the dead are 71-year-old Haj Daoud Nabi, 44-year-old Husna Ahmed, father of 2 Lilik Abdul Hamid, and 3-year-old Mukad Ibrahim. Just 4 of the 50 people, the 50 lives lost in the terrorist attack. The Muslim community in New Zealand and millions of people around the world are mourning their deaths. I want to thank Khalid Beydoun, law professor at University of Arkansas, author of American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear, and Christian Picciolini, founder of Free Radicals Project, was a white supremacist himself in the 80s and 90s, and has written a number of books on this issue, among them White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement and How I Got Out. When we come back, young people take to the streets around the world to demand change around climate change. Stay with us.
You're running behind the time, speeding up online, using cars and trains, cruising by aeroplanes, catching the stars above. But when is the time for love? You're searching for paradise. It's here, look into my eyes. I'm an island, surrounded by the sea. My beloved
I'm an Island by by Bernadette LaHangst. The song is written for the opening of the Conference of the Climate, or COP23. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Up to 1.4 million young people around the world took part in a global climate strike Friday to demand world leaders do more to address the dangers of climate. Strikes were reported in 125 countries. The mass protests were sparked by 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, who skips school every Friday to sit outside the Swedish parliament to demand leaders act on climate. On Friday, Greta spoke at her rally in Stockholm, Sweden.
The last time I checked, there were over 123 countries where there were going to be strikes today, and 2,052 places, cities.
Greta Thunberg was just nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Here in New York, students held a climate strike rally outside City Hall.
My name is Diego Delgado. I go to the Bronx Academy for Software Engineering. The reason I came here with my flag of Puerto Rico is because I wanted to show support for the island. I want to show support for the rest of the Caribbean because it's a very low-lying area that needs to have support put onto it because the oceans are rising very quickly and these are very susceptible to that, as well as the fact that Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and other islands in 2017. Many still haven't recovered. 3,000 people died in Puerto Rico, including members of my own family. And I think it's an issue that the United States did not focus enough on, and Puerto Rico did not receive enough aid from the United States. So it just goes to show that climate change is killing people already, and the U.S. has complete inaction on it.
My name is Zoe, and I go to the Brooklyn Free School. My sign says fracking no, because fracking is wrong and there's nothing good about it. And it like causes earthquakes, it pollutes the water around it, so people and animals can die. It's horrible.
When our planet's under attack, what do we do? When our planet's under attack, what do we do?
My name is Tasnim Imu, and I'm from Urban Assembly Institute of Math and Science for Young Women. They say that education isn't worth sacrificing to make a political point, but I think they're wrong because we're all here going to school and we think that we have this big future for us, but our education will be ignored if we're too busy trying to survive instead of living.
Sea levels are rising and so
Some of the voices here in New York at this part of the global climate march. For more, we're joined in New York by 18-year-old Alyssa Chen, one of the organizers of the walkout at New York's Bronx High School of Science. Alyssa, it's great to have you with us. We saw you out there speaking to the crowd. Why did you organize Bronx Science?
All right. Well, for a long time, I felt like I was the only one in my school who felt very strongly about this and felt like we needed to have a presence in this march. But apparently I was joined by 3 other very passionate individuals in my school, one of which, named Azalea Danes, had created her own Instagram account and mobilized hundreds of our students to follow it and keep up with this climate strike that we were organizing. And then for 2 weeks straight, with like barely any sleep, we worked on a 7-page proposal to our school administration. We worked on the logistics behind this walkout, that we were going to walk out to this park outside of our school and give speeches in the bleachers and be able to mobilize these people and make them feel very, angry at the government for what it has not done to address climate change.
What do you want Mayor de Blasio to do?
I want Mayor de Blasio to recognize that we have a voice in this, that we have the ability and the passion and the will to really move this forward and solve the climate crisis. Because if politicians today are not addressing this, and those are the ones in office right now, we are the ones who want our voices heard.
President Trump has called immigration a national emergency. What do you respond to him?
I respond to him that climate change is the real demanding existential issue of today, not to ignore immigration, not to devalue the issue, but I think he's drawing the attention away from the biggest elephant in the room, from what our country as the second highest polluter in the world.
Do you think climate change is a national emergency?
Yes, I thoroughly believe so, and I believe that scientists across the nation and the world also agree with me.
Alyssa Chen, I want to thank you for being with us, 18-year-old senior at Bronx High School of Science. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, everybody's rolling now, so you're ready on the set?
More or less.
We will do a show.
We will certainly.
In 3, 2, 1.
You can read a person's bio, listen to a list of their accomplishments in both the professional and personal realms, know the facts of their lives. But for us, Susan Lindquist's voice will always stand out front and center through her advocacy for the Cape, for housing, for economics, for the empowerment of women, for the environment. Her voice sung out loud and clear for all that is beautiful and special on our little stretch of sand.
Hi, thanks for staying tuned for the Susan Lindquist Show. I am Susan Lindquist, and
We loved her for her shows, This Place Matters and The Susan Lindquist Show. We loved her when she brought her special brand of knowledge and deep understanding to lead roundtables and guide diverse groups of guests through complex issues, bringing clarity through conversation. But we loved her even more for the perspective she brought to both big regional topics and the silly little daily interactions of life. We loved how she didn't let anything stop her. Not a dissenting view, not a missing microphone, not a misbehaving chair, not an extra guest or two, and not even a brief blip of hair loss slowed her down. She said she wasn't afraid to show people that she was out there fighting. We valued her counsel, her humor, her insights, and her listening ear. Yes, we valued that voice and difference it made in our lives and in the lives of our viewers, listeners, and community members. For us, Susan Lindquist will always be someone who matters and someone who we will miss deeply and often.
until then, just keep eating your clams up, Hampshire. Thank you so much for being here today. That's it.
Good evening, I'm Talia Landry and welcome to the First Light News. Tribal elections took place last month and all the newly elected Tribal Council members were sworn in at the February 20th Tribal Council meeting, including the re-elected Winnie Johnson Graham, Carlton Hendricks Jr., and Yvonne Avant, and the newly elected Brian Whedon, Aaron Toby Jr., and Rita Pocknick Gonzalez. In other good news, the tribe received a $40,000 grant for the Shellfish Farm Expansion Project. The project is looking for 4 volunteers to learn basic agriculture techniques and participate in the Shellfish Farm Density Monitoring Program. The volunteers will be separated among 2 age groups. 2 volunteers ages 14 to 17 will work 110 hours from June through August, and the other 2 volunteers ages 18 to 30 will also work May through October for 240 hours. And the older volunteers will have the option of joining the Shellfish Farm Manager in the biannual Food Sovereignty Summit Conference in September in Wisconsin. If you're interested in volunteering in this project, contact Corey Hendricks via email at corey.hendricks@mwtribe-nsn.gov or by phone at 508-477-0208, extension 141. And now I'll send it over to Kobe Howerton for an update from the youth.
Thanks, Talia. Traditional dance class will resume on March 21st for every Thursday from 6:30 to 9 p.m. and will continue until the end of June. It's that time of year again for the Mashpee Wampanoag Youth Council's Youth Ball. Come celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Youth Council this Saturday, March 23rd from 6 to 11 p.m. at the Community and Government Center. Tickets start at $15 and $20 at the door for this semi-formal event. All youth ages 13 to 21 are invited. Contact Co-Secretaries Troy Stewart or Deja Fry for tickets today. April vacation is right around the corner, and the Education Department is offering a 4-day camp for grades 1 through 6 from 8:30 to 4:30. The camp is open to 25 students and is on a first-come, first-served basis from April 15th to the 18th. Contact Kitty Hendricks Miller to reserve your child's spot today at 508-477-0208, extension 143. Also, the Education Department Career Pathways for Tribal Youth continues college tours for April vacation for high school juniors and seniors with a parent or guardian. The tour includes transportation from the Community and Government Center as well as a hotel stay and per diem. They are headed to Bowdoin College in Maine for 2 days and then a few of New Mexico's Native American colleges for 5 days. You must RSVP for the tours prior to going. Contact John Hanlon to save your spot today. And that is all I have for you for the Youth Update. Stay tuned for our monthly newscast to hear the latest from the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Youth. Back to you, Talia.
Thanks, Kobe. Language Community Night will be on Friday, March 29th for all tribal household members. Join children and families enrolled in the WLRP programs for a night filled with WAMP language games, stories, songs, and prayers from 4:30 to 5:30, to be followed by a potluck dinner until 6:30. The Housing Commission and Department will host an honorary partnership ceremony to start up the new First Light Wampanoag homes. All tribal citizens are invited on Saturday, March 30th at 11 a.m. to the ceremony at the housing site at 184 Meeting House Road in Mashpee. Refreshments will be served at the center following the ceremony. RSVP to the Housing Department at 508-477-0208, extension 104. Save the date for the annual Herring Day festivities on April 17th from 10 to 4 p.m. at the Mashpee Wampanoag Indian Museum. Come welcome the herring with your tribal family with fun activities, singing, dancing, and of course, fishing. For more information, contact Kitty Hendricks Miller. Lastly, many committees are still seeking interested and dedicated tribal members to join their team. The newly developed Land Use Committee is seeking members to serve. Duties will consist of land use planning and land acquisition recommendations. The Powwow Committee is also seeking members to organize the tribe's annual powwow. There's also one open seat on the Housing Commission and Enrollment Committee. Any tribal members interested in serving on any of the mentioned committees, please submit a letter of interest to Francie Doughton at francis.doughton@mwtribe-nsn.gov. And that's all we have for our First Light News Update. If you have any announcements you wish to be covered, please contact me at talia@mashpeetv.com. We'll see you next month for more tribal updates. Pish Kanash.
With the Mashpee Police Department, and we're here to talk about pet safety during the winter months. The biggest issues we have in the winter time is the cold temperatures. You definitely want to keep your animals well fed and water because they burn more calories during the winter time. Another big safety issue during winter time is the de-icing products. A lot of our products are toxic, so if you do bring your pets out for a walk, when you get them home, you definitely want to clean their paws, their legs, and their underbelly area, and make sure it's clean of all products because that can irritate their paws, cause dryness and irritation and sometimes infections. The best thing if you see the paws are drying up and irritated, definitely keep them well washed, cleaned. If it gets to where they're having difficulty walking, definitely bring them to a veterinarian because they have medication that can take care of the problems that they're having. During cold temperatures, especially extreme cold, obviously if there's a weather advisory, animals really shouldn't be outside at all, definitely at night. Basically the rule of thumb is like if it gets to the point where it's too cold for you to be out, then it's really too cold for the animal to be out. I mean, they'll have a little bit of longer duration. If you can't take the temperature, best is to bring them inside. If they do need to bring them out, just bring them out for like 15 minutes leashed, because you definitely want to keep them leashed because you don't want them running off. and then they'll be out there for a lot longer, and they can possibly get lost, especially during the snow and all that. Hypothermia in a pet, a lot of signs will be that they'll be doing a lot of whining, they'll be really anxious, shivering, and the movements will slow down. So when your pet starts to show signs of that, definitely get them into a warmer area as soon as possible to get them warmed up. If it's real bad and it doesn't slow down, half-hour period of time, definitely call your veterinarian. A lot of people will take their pets during errands to run around, but they don't realize when they go into a store or even to an appointment, they might think, well, I'm going to be in and out real quick, but that turns into a half hour, 45 minutes to an hour, and that animal is in that car in extreme cold, and that can be a dangerous situation. So if you don't need to bring your pet out, just leave them at home. That would be the safest for the animal. The big issue during the winter time obviously is frozen ponds. If your animal does get out onto a pond, or if you do see another animal in the pond, do not go out there to try to get the animal off. The animal's a lot less weight than you are, so the guys may be able to hold them, but when you go out there, chances are they won't hold you, so you'll be in the pond, and it's an issue. But if you see an animal, just call your local police or fire department, let them know what's going on, let them come down, assess the situation, and we'll deal with it. The biggest safety is just being prepared. Keep a current photo of your animal, so if they do get loose and get lost, you have that current photo. Make sure they have tags and current licenses for, with phone numbers, addresses, and the best thing to do is have your pet microchipped by your local veterinarian with a chip. We microscan them when we find them, and we just call the owner, get them home. If there's an issue, your pet is lost, or if you have any questions about safety or any kind of pet questions, you can call me at the station. My number is 508-539-1480, extension 7264, and I'll get back to you.
She's so bright, she strolls all night, kissing the stars in the morning light, but she ain't got nothing on my man. He's all I need, he's all for me, he's my baby, I believe. We get older, but we don't get cold, 'cause when those Romeos turn away and the poets don't know what to say, he ain't got much, but he's here to stay. Yes, I know where we could go, New York City or Mexico, but my days are empty.
I am the program manager for the renewables program in the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. We're a federal agency responsible for developing energy resources on the outer continental shelf. We appreciate that industry and environmental organizations and maritime organizations are here to speak with us tonight. And we need your knowledge and expertise in order for us to move the process forward. So we appreciate your being here tonight. Our nation has an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and offshore renewable energy, particularly wind, is a very, very major component of that effort. And in particular, we have leaders here in the Atlantic and especially here in the Northeast. We now have essentially 15 offshore wind leases in the Atlantic, stretching from Massachusetts to North Carolina. And it is a very promising resource, but the effects of developing that resource can put stresses on other users of the ocean. So we developed a process a long time ago, back in 2009, and we've conducted leases since that time, and that process depends very heavily on stakeholder input. So again, we appreciate your being here tonight. I want to note that Here on the East Coast, we have, in order to assure that we have stakeholder input, we've established 15 intergovernmental state renewable energy task forces. And here in Massachusetts, we've had that task force meet over 14 times, and we also have had about 20 stakeholder meetings. As you're probably well aware, we had a shutdown recently, and a number of activities were postponed, but we're trying to get back on track, and we've rescheduled these public hearings for this week. Last couple nights in Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, tonight here in Hyannis, tomorrow New Bedford, and then Narragansett. Public comment period stays open until February 22nd. I want to note particularly about fisheries. We want to make sure that we fully understand the issues and the concerns so that we're in a position to make good decisions about minimizing impacts, identifying possible mitigation for impacts, and monitoring impacts for improvement over the long haul. This process, we're here tonight to talk about the Vineyard Wind project. And this process, this NEPA process, for those of you that are familiar with it, is very thorough, and it can be somewhat complex, especially in particular areas. For that reason, we have a number of subject matter experts here from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and I ask all of the BOEM employees to raise their hands. If you have any questions that are not answered through the discussion or the posters, talk to any one of these individuals, and we'll have the answer for you, or we'll find out for you. With that, I want to hand it over to the other half of the overall program that is necessary for successful wind energy projects, particularly in the offshore, and that's the state of Massachusetts in this case, which has been a leader in the development of offshore resources. So I'm going to introduce Bruce Carlisle from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. Thanks to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for coming to Hyannis this evening. Again, my name is Bruce Carlisle. I'm with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. I'm here on behalf of Energy and Environmental Affairs Secretary Matt Beaton. We're really looking forward to the presentations, but most of all to hearing the input and comments from tonight and from the written comments that you may have on the Vineyard Wind project. Global climate change presents a serious threat to the Commonwealth's environment, to our residents, to our communities, and to our economy. Governor Baker was down in D.C. Last week on Wednesday and testified before Congress on the urgency of the issue. He put it well as part of his testimony. I thought I'd just share a few sentences here. The magnitude of the impacts from climate change requires all of us to put politics aside and act together, quickly and decisively. We still have the opportunity to check the severity of future impacts by aggressively reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to the changes that are ongoing. That is the path we have taken in Massachusetts. So the governor's commitment is strong, as is our state legislature and a lot of folks. But the governor's commitment is also to do the responsible development of offshore wind. So I think that's really, really important. That goes back to what Jim was saying. A couple sort of policy contexts on, again, sort of why we're here and why we're part of the equation. In 2008, Massachusetts became one of the first states in the nation to require significant and measurable greenhouse gas carbon emissions. That's our 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act. And it set a target of 80% by 2050. And that 80% is down from 1990 baseline levels. And we've got goals every decade that we need to meet. So we're on track to meet our 2020 goal of 25% reduction from 1990. And far from being an economic burden, we've seen close to a 70% increase in our gross state domestic product during this time. So in terms of offshore wind, it's a big part of that equation. And basically for the last decade, since 2009, with the formation of the intergovernmental task force that Jim referenced, we've worked really closely with our federal, with our state, local, and tribal partners on the planning, on the siting, on the leasing of potential projects on the Outer Continental Shelf. For Massachusetts, that intergovernmental group wasn't sufficient for us to be able to engage. So we formed two working groups, our fisheries working group on offshore wind and a habitat working group on offshore wind. And that's to help us get the additional input and let these stakeholders speak directly to BOEM, to our friends in the Coast Guard, and to others, and to have those conversations on a more frequent basis. In addition, we've held numerous community-based meetings, not only like the one we're in tonight, but smaller across the South Coast and Islands and Cape, and in Boston as well. So these are really, really important venues for us as we continue on this process. So again, context-wise, in 2017, as directed by state law, Massachusetts issued a competitive request for proposals for offshore wind energy. And in 2018, after this competitive process, selected Vineyard Wind project as being the most competitive, as being the most cost-effective, and meeting other criteria. So that process had some other pieces to it, including a Department of Public Utilities review and an Energy Facility and Siting Board review and some other state permitting, which I'll talk about in a sec. But that project is going to make significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And it also, as I mentioned before, comes at a very, very competitive price. So the BOEM process is very, very, very important. BOEM is the leading jurisdiction in the federal waters, but there are active state reviews on the Massachusetts side. Last week, Energy and Environmental Affairs Secretary Matt Beaton issued a certificate on the project's final environmental impact report. So that's sort of a similar to what's going on at the federal level, but for the state level through our Massachusetts Environmental Policy Office, and allows the project to proceed next to state permitting. So a couple updates on the state front. In January, Vineyard Wind filed a combined 401 and water quality certification and Chapter 91 permit application with our Department of Environmental Protection. So public notice of that state review will occur on or around February 20th with comment periods and opportunities to follow. Our Office of Coastal Zone Management is currently reviewing the project for consistency with our state enforceable policies, and that review is expected to conclude this spring. As I mentioned, the DPU, the Department of Public Utilities, is reviewing the Vineyard Wind energy contracts. Hearings were held earlier this month, and a decision is expected this spring. And the Energy Facility Siting Board is reviewing 3 different petitions from Vineyard Wind. Public hearings have been held, and a decision is expected in April. So I think, in terms of state perspective, just some context and framework there from us. I do want to thank Jim and his team. As you guys know, the federal government shutdown affected the previously scheduled public meetings and the comment period. And you guys acted really expeditiously to reschedule those. You guys are here all week. You reopened the comment period, and you did it very quickly. And thanks, Jim, for your team, for your continued commitment to this. So with that, I look forward to hearing the rest of the evening's proceedings.
Thank you, Bruce. We certainly appreciate it. And we want to reiterate again that our ability to move forward on this is really based on the cooperation with the state, and that's a key component of any success that we do realize. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian Crever. He is our coordinator for this environmental impact statement for the Vineyard Wind project. He's going to give you some of the basics so that we have a common ground to talk from. And go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Jim. So I have a brief presentation tonight, try to walk you through some of the background of this project, background of what an environmental impact statement is, what we're doing here tonight, what we want comments on, and a little bit about what's in the draft environmental impact statement. So when you arrived tonight, there were posters around the room. They're still up there. And this is just a kind of an overview of some of the posters that are there. We have posters about our leasing and environmental review process, posters about commercial fishing impacts, marine mammals and underwater noise, cumulative impacts, navigation, and the definitions of impacts. You're going to hear about minor, moderate, major impacts. So how do we come up with that? And so that poster helps kind of explain it. Also, we have posters on the proposed action and alternatives, and I'll actually get into that in the presentation. Poster on the benthic habitat, so what's on the bottom of the sea. Maps of the project area, poster on avian impacts, poster on historic preservation, and then maybe the most important is how to comment, the first kind of poster you see when you walk in. We also have a court reporter tonight. She's going to be recording everything that goes on. So if you make a public statement, that will be officially part of the record. And you can also go and talk to the court reporter at any point during the meeting and give a statement if you don't want to speak publicly. So this is our leasing and development process. We started back in 2009 with our first task force meeting out here in Massachusetts, way back here. And since then, there's been a lot of meetings, a lot of development, and we've arrived today in the middle of our environmental and technical review process. And so you probably have heard about a lot of different projects, a lot of different leasing going on out there. But tonight we're talking about the area in orange in the Vineyard Wind lease. To the west, you have Bay State Wind, and we recently held an auction back in December. And there are 3 provisional winners for the 3 additional Massachusetts leases. Equinor Wind, Mayflower Wind, and Vineyard Wind has another lease out there. But the proposed project that we're discussing tonight is just the orange area in the northern portion of Vineyard Wind's lease. So back in December of 2017, Vineyard Wind submitted a construction and operations plan. And BOEM, our agency, can either approve, disapprove, or approve that plan with modifications. And this will happen after we publish the final environmental impact statement. And this decision will be recorded through a record of decision document that will be published. So a quick overview of the Vineyard Wind project. 106 turbine locations, up to 100 turbines. 8 to 10 megawatt machines would be used for the turbines. Vineyard Wind has, since the submission of the COP, made an agreement to use 9.5 megawatt turbines, so some of the largest ever designed. Total capacity of 800 megawatts. All of them would be monopiles, or there would be up to 10 jacket foundations. And cable landfall at 1 of 2 locations on Cape Cod. The preferred cable location is Covell's Beach. And Vineyard Wind and Barnstable have signed a host community agreement. And we're going to get more into the landing when we talk about alternatives. So you might have heard the term NEPA, or the National Environmental Policy Act, and might wonder, what is that? Well, it's a procedural law and requires federal agencies to assess the impacts of an action on the environment, the human environment, so more than just whales and turtles, but also on people. And it's very important to do this prior to making a decision, so the decision maker understands what the impact of that action is going to be. And I just always like to note that it's not the National Environmental Protection Act. There is the acknowledgement that federal actions can have impacts on the environment, and this one does. And we record it through our environmental impact statement that there could be moderate and even major impacts on some resources. And so some of the major decision points where we do NEPA work or an environmental analysis, lease issuance, so for the survey work and a meteorological tower or meteorological buoy, as well as plan approval, construction and operation plan like we're doing tonight, and decommissioning activities. So an environmental impact statement, one of these must be prepared if you're doing a major federal action that significantly affects the quality of the human environment. And so we determined that this would be one of those kind of actions, then went ahead and wrote an environmental impact statement. So there's various public comments that are required, and public hearings like this. Public comment is required for scoping and trying to determine what we really need to look at and what alternatives to look at. So we had a public scoping back in April and in this very room. And there's also a public comment period required for the draft environmental impact statement, which we're in right now. And we have to analyze reasonable alternatives, including a no action alternative, as well as cumulative effects of the action. So this is our environmental review process. Not going to go into too much detail, but starts with the submittal of a construction and operations plan. We held public scoping, and right now we are at the bottom of the draft environmental impact statement process, holding public hearings. And the next step is a final environmental impact statement and a record of decision. So what kicked off the whole process was the publishing of a notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement. And we had 5 public scoping meetings back in April of 2018. And there was a 30-day public comment period that closed on April 30th. And if you want to read the comments, we have them posted online. The most important thing is just this number right here. You can go to regulations.gov and type in BOEM-2018-0015, and you can read all the comments. We also recently published a notice of availability for the draft EIS. So this just tells everyone that the document's available for review. And it opened a 45-day public comment period. However, if you've seen the news, there was a government shutdown, and it was kind of in the middle of the comment period. We had to reschedule the hearings, and as a result, extended the comment period so that the folks that attend these hearings could have the opportunity to go back, think about what they heard, and submit comments after that. So it's been extended until February 22nd of 2019. So public comments, we all work in Washington, D.C., or right outside of D.C., and we recognize that we don't have the local expertise that people who actually live in the area do. And so it's important to come out and hear what you guys have to say, what you experience out there in the ocean, and what you experience here on land with cable landfall locations. So that's why we come out here, and that's why we want your comments. They make for a better document, they make for better decisions, and more informed decisions. So the type of information specifically we're looking for, you can really submit a comment on anything, but the most helpful comments that make the best documents are the ones that inform these kind of things: the accuracy of the information within the document, the adequacy of the methodology or assumptions we use in our analysis, new information that's relevant to the analysis or that would change a conclusion. So I know there's new studies coming out all the time, new developments offshore all the time. If you know of any that we didn't have in our document, please let us know. New alternatives that meet the purpose and need statement, which is kind of in the beginning of the document, that are feasible and that are substantially different than what we have already looked at. We have the ability to analyze a new alternative in the final environmental impact statement. And then where clarification is needed. So if something you read doesn't seem too clear, then others probably don't think it's that clear either. And we want to know that so we can, improve it. And then you might be wondering what we do with these comments. If there's new information, we'll incorporate into the final EIS. If there is, and then we also respond to all the comments in the document. So we try to group comments generally by their category, if possible, and then we do write responses and we let you know what we did with it. Did we improve did we put that information in the document? Where can you find it? That kind of thing. This is where the public hearing dates. We were on the islands the last 2 days. Tonight we're in Hyannis, and then tomorrow we're in New Bedford for Valentine's Day, and then on Friday evening we'll be in Narragansett. So the proposed action, you probably heard this term before. It's basically what the project is, what the proposal from Vineyard Wind was, and that's what we're analyzing as a proposed action. So it's kind of what I described earlier. And then very important is our alternatives that we look at. So these are required under the National Environmental Policy Act, and we got a lot of these through the scoping process. And the first one actually came out of comments from this room back in April. There were 2 potential cable landfall locations, one to New Hampshire Avenue through Lewis Bay, the other to Cobell's Beach. We heard a lot of feedback in this room that if you put it through Lewis Bay, there'd be a lot of environmental issues, and that's something you really need to look at. So what we did was we added that as an alternative, and as you'll see later, we actually found greater impacts by using the New Hampshire Avenue location. So alternative B has less impacts than the proposed action. Vineyard Wind went ahead and shifted their preferred landfall location to Cobbles Beach, signed a community agreement with Barnstable for that cable landfall location. The reason why both are still in the document, we haven't received a revised proposal, so they're both still in there. But we still have the ability to select alternative B and kind of force that as the cable landfall location. I know that the state has not made their decision on the cable landfall location, but that is expected in the near future. But we have the ability to do any of the alternatives or a combination of alternatives. So alternative C, we received comments mostly from the island of Nantucket that it would be great if we could eliminate some of the closest turbines. And so we analyzed that to see if that would make a difference for things like navigation, visual impacts, fishing. Then the two alternatives under alternative D, D1 and D2, are both changes to project layout and orientation and spacing between turbines. We've heard a lot from the fishing community that 1 nautical mile was needed to navigate safely and fish safely within an array. So we looked at that as one of alternatives to see if that made a difference in impacts. Also, we heard about it really needs to be an east-west orientation to allow for traditional fishing to occur. The fixed gear sets up on 0s and 5s. Mobile gear goes in between, keeps everybody out of each other's hair. So that's another thing we looked at with 1 nautical mile spacing. And then finally, we heard a lot about we should reduce the project size, less turbines, less areas out there to have impacts. So we looked at 84 turbines, up to 84 turbines as kind of the limit for that reduced project alternative. It would allow still for an 800 megawatt project using the 9.5 megawatt turbines, but would have fewer turbines out there. And then also the no action alternative if this project were not to happen.